The frost came early that year, and by the second week of October it had already silvered the fence posts outside Alder's Creek before sunup. She walked the 2 miles from town with her coat buttoned to the throat and her breath going out ahead of her in ribbons. The axe rode against her shoulder, wrapped at the head with a strip of leather, so it would not bite through her coat. She had carried it from the house she no longer owned, through 3 towns and 1 bad winter, and she had not once considered leaving it behind. The boarding house in town had a sign in the window that said rooms, and a woman behind the counter who had looked at her boots before she looked at her face. $2 a week, the woman had said. In advance. She had 11 cents and a dead husband's name, and neither would spend. So she had asked, plainly, if there was work. Splitting wood, mending, anything with hours in it. The woman had shaken her head and gone back to her ledger, and that had been the end of the conversation. Someone at the mercantile had mentioned a ranch 2 miles out, a widower, cattle and horses, more wood to split than one man had time for. Said it the way people say a thing they are not sure is kind or cruel to pass along. She had gone anyway. The gate stood where the road bent north. A low rail fence and a post with a horseshoe nailed to it gone dark with weather. Beyond it the land opened into pasture, frost still lying white in the shadow of the barn, cattle moving slow and steaming near the water trough. The house sat back from the road, plain and square, smoke rising thin from the chimney. She stopped at the gate and did not go through it. A dog came first, low and watchful, then the man behind it, coming from the direction of the barn, with a coil of rope over one shoulder. He was tall in the way of men who worked outdoors and had stopped noticing the cold. He stopped a few feet from the gate and looked at her, at the axe, at the coat, at the 11 cents she was not carrying in any visible way but that showed anyway, in how she stood. He did not ask her name. Something I can do for you. It was not quite a question. She lifted her chin a half-inch, the way she had learned to since the funeral, since the boarding houses, since the towns that looked at a woman traveling alone and decided what she must be. I can split wood, she said. I brought my own axe. The dog sat. The man's eyes went from her face to the axe and back, unhurried, the way a man looks at a fence line before deciding whether it needs mending. Behind him, past the barn, she could see a stack of unsplit rounds taller than the woodshed door, and beyond that, a porch with a chair on it that did not move in the wind the way an empty chair should. She waited at the gate, and the frost kept its grip on the grass between them, and neither of them said anything more for a long moment. He looked past her once, down the road she'd walked in on, as if to see whether anyone else was coming behind her. No one was. The road was empty both directions, the way roads outside Alder's Creek tended to be once October set in, and the traveling families had already gone wherever they were going for winter. You've done this before, he said. Not a question either. He was looking at her hands now, at the calluses that sat where calluses sat, on a woman who'd swung an axe more than once in her life. My husband taught me, she said. Before. He did not ask before what. He nodded once, like a man filing something away where he wouldn't need to look at it again. Wood's not split, he said, tipping his head toward the stack behind the barn. Won't be enough for winter, unless somebody does something about it soon. I've been meaning to. I can start today. He considered that. The dog had gotten up again, circling once, before dropping back down at his heel. Patient, the way dogs get, when they've learned a man takes his time deciding things. Tack room's got a cot, he said. Stove doesn't reach it much, but there's blankets. You'd eat at the house. Not with me sitting there watching you do it. I've got work, but there's food, and you're welcome to it. She said nothing yet. She had learned that silence, too, since the funeral. The kind that let a man finish saying what he meant to say before she answered and made it about herself. That's the offer, he said. Wood for the winter, Split and stacked where I can get to it easy. Bed in the tack room till it's done. Meals while you're here. Nothing past that. The last part he said plainly, not unkindly. The way a man states a fence line so there's no confusion about it later. She understood it for what it was. Not a kindness dressed up as anything else, and not a door left open to more than what he'd named. That's fair, she said. It's not fair, he said. It's what I've got to give. She looked at the woodpile again, at its size, at the way it would take her weeks if she worked every daylight hour she had. She looked at the porch, at the chair that sat too still. I'll take it, she said. He nodded once more, and turned toward the barn without waiting to see if she'd follow, the way a man does when he's already decided the matter is settled, and doesn't see the use in standing around confirming it twice. The dog fell in beside him. She hefted her own axe onto her shoulder, picked up the bag at her feet, and went through the gate after them both, the frost cracking thin and white beneath her boots the whole way in. The tack room smelled of leather and dust and something dry underneath, like grain gone old. She set her bag on the cot, unrolled the thin blanket already there, and went back out before the cold could settle into her. The woodpile waited by the shed, uncut rounds stacked higher than her shoulder. She found a stump with a flat top, planted her boots, and swung. The axe came down clean. She had been splitting wood since she was 9 years old, since her father lost the use of his left hand, and someone had to keep the stove going. She knew the grain of oak from the grain of pine by the sound alone. She knew where to strike, so the wood gave itself apart instead of fighting her for it. By mid-afternoon there was a rhythm to it, swing and fall, and the soft clatter of split wood landing in its stack, and she did not stop to wipe her face until her arms told her she had to. He came out once, mid-morning, to check on the horses in the near pasture. He did not look at her long, but he looked. She was already 3 rows into the stack by then, the wood squared off neat the way her husband used to like it, corners flush, no gaps a draft could find. He walked the fence line, hands in his coat pockets, and did not say anything, and she did not expect him to. The dog came and lay near the stump for a while, watching the axe rise and fall like it was something worth keeping an eye on. The cold thickened as the sun dropped toward the ridge. Her hands had gone stiff around the handle, though she did not let that show in her swing. She kept going until the light started to fail, until the shapes of the fence posts blurred soft at their edges, and then she straightened and looked at what she'd done. A good stack. Not enough. Not close to enough. But a start. When she turned back toward the porch, there was a cup sitting on the rail. Steam still coming off it, thin into the cold air. She hadn't heard him bring it. She picked it up. It was strong, black, made the way a man makes coffee when he isn't making it for anyone but himself. She drank it standing there, looking out at the rows of wood she'd cut, at the dark coming down over the pasture, at the light in the house window, where he'd already gone back in. He hadn't said a word about it. He hadn't stayed to watch her drink it, hadn't asked if it suited her. She set the empty cup back on the rail exactly where she'd found it, the way a person returns a thing they weren't sure they were meant to keep. Then she went into the tack room, lay down in her coat, and slept harder than she had in over a year. Frost came early that week, thick enough on the grass that her boots left dark prints walking to the woodpile before light. She learned the sound the axe made when the wood was still half frozen, a duller crack, and she learned to wait until the sun had cleared the ridge before starting on the bigger rounds, when the give in the grain came easier. He kept to his own work. Fence posts on the east line had gone soft with rot, and she'd hear the thud of the post hole digger from across the pasture, steady, unhurried, a sound she came to place the way she placed the hour by the light. Some mornings she saw him far off leading a horse by its halter, checking a shoe, running a hand down a foreleg. He did not come to watch her split wood. She did not go to watch him work fence. It was not distance so much as respect, each leaving the other to what needed doing. Supper came at 6. She cooked what she found. Dry beans she'd soaked since morning. Cornbread from a recipe she carried more in her hands than her head. Whatever meat he brought in from the smokehouse without saying where it had been. They ate at the same table, her at one end, him at the other, the lamp between them throwing more shadow than light. Neither of them talked much. The first few nights the quiet had a weight to it, the kind that made her count the scrape of her fork against the plate. By the fourth night, it had changed into something else. He'd ask if the axe head needed rehanging. She'd ask if he wanted the last of the cornbread. That was the whole of it, some evenings. It was enough. She noticed he ate everything on his plate and never asked for more, the way a man eats who has spent a long time cooking for no one and forgotten what wanting food felt like. She noticed he set his own plate in the basin after, without being asked, and that he'd taken to filling the wood box by the stove himself before bed, so she wouldn't have to in the morning cold. By the second week, the silence between them had stopped feeling like something to get through. It sat in the room the way the stove sat in the corner, present, warm at the edges, not needing to be filled. She'd catch herself, some nights, staring at the low fire a beat longer than the meal required, and he'd be doing the same across the table, neither of them in any hurry to rise. The woodpile grew by the day, log on log, a wall taking shape against the shed. She did not know yet how much wood a winter here required. She only knew the stack was still short of it, and that some part of her had stopped counting the days until it wouldn't be. The chair sat at the far end of the porch, past the window, where the roofline threw the deepest shadow by afternoon. She'd seen it the first evening and thought nothing of it. A rocking chair on a porch was not a strange thing. Every house she'd ever known had one. Chair worn smooth at the arms from hands passing over it season after season. This one had no such wear. The wood had grayed evenly, the way wood grays when weather touches it and nothing else does. The joints had loosened with damp and dried again, loosened and dried, until the whole frame had a faint list to it, like a man standing too long in one position. The cane seat had gone soft and sagged in the middle, a shallow bowl where no one sat. She noticed, without meaning to, that he never looked at it. He'd come out mornings and his eyes went to the sky first, gauging weather, then to the horses, then to her at the woodpile. The chair sat in his blind spot the way a name sits just behind the tongue. He walked past it, the way a man walks past a room he has stopped entering. She did not ask. It was not her place to ask, and some part of her, the part that had learned, in her own year of silence after the fever took her husband, what a question could do to a person not ready for it, understood that some things had to be walked around rather than through. But the first hard frost came in the third week, silvering the porch boards by morning, and she found herself standing before the chair with an old wool blanket over her arm, one she'd found folded at the bottom of the trunk in the tack room and mended a small moth hole in the corner of, almost without deciding to. She laid it over the chair's arm, not on the seat, not tucked in, the way a blanket goes over a lap, just draped, loose, the way you'd cover something you meant to protect but not disturb. She stepped back and looked at it a moment. Then she went to split the day's wood and did not think of it again until evening, when she came in for supper and saw him standing at the window, looking out at the porch the way he never did, the blanket pale against the gray wood in the last of the light. He didn't say anything about it. He turned from the window when she came in, and there was something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not quite trouble, not quite ease, a thing suspended between the two, the way the chair itself was suspended between use and disuse. He set the table. She stirred the pot. Outside, the blanket held its place against the coming cold, and neither of them spoke of it, though she noticed, the next morning, that it was still there, and still exactly as she'd left it. Sunday came with a hard blue sky, and frost still white in the shadows of the fence posts. The girl arrived on a spotted pony her uncle had bought her 2 summers back. tying it herself at the rail, hopping down before the animal had fully stopped. She was 8, maybe 9. She had her uncle's way of not wasting movement, but none of his quiet. She talked the way water runs downhill, without any sense that it might stop. She found the widow at the woodpile and sat on an overturned crate to watch, swinging her boots, asking questions the way children do, one after another, none of them waiting for an answer before the next arrived. "Do you like it here? Did you know my Aunt Ruth had a horse that bit? Are you going to stay through Christmas?" The widow answered what she could, let the rest pass, and kept the axe moving. It was in the space between two of these, the girl picking at a scab on her knee, not looking up, that she said it plain, the way children say the things adults have learned to carry sideways. "My uncle used to have a wife. She died having the baby. The baby died too. I don't remember it. I was real little. My ma says it was 5 years back, near winter, same as now." The widow's axe came down and split the round clean, and she did not let her hands slow. "That's so," she said. "Ma says he doesn't talk about it. Ma says don't ask him." The girl looked up, guileless. "I'm not asking him. I'm telling you. I understand." The girl went back to her scab, and the subject closed itself the way a door closes when no one is holding it, without weight, without meaning to. The widow set another round on the block. She thought of the chair on the porch, 5 years unmoved. She thought of the rafters in the woodshed, and did not let herself think further than that, because the small cloth bundle up there had a shape she had already guessed at, and had decided, without deciding, that she would never say she'd found. She thought of the blanket, still draped where she'd left it that morning, and of him at the window the evening before, looking at a plain piece of cloth, like it had asked him something. The girl stayed through the afternoon, ate bread and butter at the kitchen table, told the widow about her pony's opinions on mud, and left before supper with her uncle, walking her out to the rail, lifting her up onto the pony's back with both hands under her arms, the way a man lifts something he does not want to drop. The widow watched from the woodshed door. He said something to the girl she couldn't hear. The girl laughed and rode off down the lane, and he stood there a moment after she'd gone, looking at the empty road the way he'd looked at the porch the evening before. Then he turned and saw the widow watching, and neither of them said anything about what either of them now knew. The evening settled cold and clear, the kind of sky that comes just before the first hard frost, and she went back out to the woodshed after supper dishes were done, because there was kindling to bundle before dark closed in fully. She worked by lamplight, sorting split ends into the crate by the door, and it was reaching up to set a stray piece of shake shingle on the top shelf that her hand found the gap in the rafters where the boards didn't quite meet. Something soft, something that did not belong among nails and coiled rope and the dry smell of pine. She drew it down careful, the way she'd handle a bird's nest she didn't want to break, and unwound the cloth enough to see what was inside before her hands stopped on their own. 2 small knitted boots, no bigger than her thumb, yarn gone the color of weak tea with age, the tiny laces still tied in bows someone had taken time over. She stood there a long moment, with the lamp throwing her shadow big against the shed wall. She thought of the blanket left folded on the porch rail that morning, the way he'd looked at it the evening before like it had a voice. She thought of the girl saying, offhand and without weight, the way children say the heaviest things, that her uncle's wife was buried up past the second fence line, that there'd been a baby too, and that nobody talked about it. And did the widow want to see her pony do its trick with the gate latch? She had not asked a single question then. She was not going to start now. She wound the cloth back exactly as it had been, folding the same creases, tucking the same corner under, and set it back into the gap between the rafters where her hand had found it, pushing it in until it sat flush and hidden the way it had sat for however many winters before this one. She blew out the lamp and went back to the house, through cold that had teeth in it now, real cold, the first hard frost of the season crusting the grass white under her boots. October went out quiet, and November came in the same way, one day folding into the next without ceremony. She kept count of neither. She kept count of the woodpile instead, and it told its own story better than any calendar. Round after round, split and stacked, the rows climbing past her waist, past her shoulder, straight-edged and tight, the way she'd learned her father stack it, bark side up, so the rain would run off clean. The house changed in ways he did not mention, and she did not point out. The kitchen curtains had hung crooked since before she arrived, one panel drooping where a hook had pulled loose from the fabric. She found a needle and thread in the tin box under the washstand and fixed it one evening after supper, standing on a chair in the lamplight, and by morning the curtains hung even, and nobody said a word about it, but she noticed he looked at them twice. The cupboard door by the stove had squealed on its hinge since she'd first pushed it open looking for a cup. She oiled it with bacon grease and it went quiet. He opened it 3 times the next day like he was testing something, and each time it gave him nothing but silence. She learned how he took his coffee without asking. Black, no sugar, but he liked it strong enough to sit up in the cup, and she started making it that way without comment. And he started drinking the whole cup instead of leaving the bottom third, the way he had those first weeks, back when he drank it like a man doing a chore rather than a man who wanted it. He noticed things too, in his own economical way. He stopped knocking before he came in from the barn of an evening, just called out that it was him, and let the door swing. He left the good axe handle out for her instead of the one with the crack running up through the grain, though he never said why he'd swapped them. He started leaving a second cup out on the counter in the mornings before she came down, set beside his own, both of them waiting for the coffee to finish boiling. She saw the cup the first morning it appeared, and said nothing. She simply took it down and filled it. The pony trick the girl had promised came and went one Sunday, the gate latch clicking open under a small nose, while the widow watched from the porch step with a dish towel still in her hands, and for a moment, watching the child laugh, she forgot to keep her face still. He was watching her when she looked up. He looked away first. The frost came early that week, hard enough to whiten the grass by morning and keep it white past noon. She banked the stove higher than usual, and he let her, coming in from the barn with his collar turned up and his hands red at the knuckle. He sat that night longer than he needed to. She was mending a shirt sleeve by the lamp, and he had a cup of coffee going cold in front of him, and the stove ticked as it does when the wood inside shifts and settles. He did not look at her when he started talking. He looked at the stove door, at the seam of orange light along its edge. She used to hate the cold, he said it got into the house before it got into the yard. She'd stuff rags under the door herself. Wouldn't wait on me to do it. The widow did not stop her needle. 5 years this December, he said. The baby would have been 5.5 now. Near enough. Girl, we had a name picked, but I don't. He stopped. Started again, on flatter ground. Doctor came from town, but the roads were bad. Ice, that year too. Worse than this. He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table, though it was not full enough to need steadying. I built the chair before either of them, he said. Thought I was building it for one more chore. Turned out I built it for nothing. He said this without bitterness, the way a man reports a fact about weather that has already passed. Been out there since. I go out and look at it some nights. Don't rightly know why. The widow set her needle through the fabric to hold her place. She did not reach for him. She did not offer the soft words that fill a room and then evaporate before morning. She only stayed where she was, at the table, the lamp between them throwing her shadow long across the floorboards, and let the silence after his words sit there uncorrected. That's a hard thing to carry alone, she said finally. Not a question. Not comfort dressed up as one. Wasn't much choosing in it, he said. Man does what's in front of him. I know that part, she said. He looked at her then, and something in his face loosened by a degree, the way a jaw does when a tooth finally stops aching. Not healed, just quiet. Neither of them said anything else for a while. The stove ticked. Outside, the frost kept thickening on the fence rails, and the horses moved once in the barn, a low sound through the wall. She did not ask what the girl's name would have been. She only finished her mending, folded the shirt over her knee, and stayed at the table until he rose first, which he had never done before her in 6 weeks of evenings. Frost had furred the woodpile overnight, a white sheen on the split faces that caught the early sun and threw it back in small hard points. She worked through it anyway, the axe biting clean, the rounds falling away in 2 even halves. Her breath went up in short clouds. By the time the wagon came up the lane, wheels cracking through the crust in the ruts, she had a stack going that reached her shoulder. The feedman was called Halloran, a wide, unhurried sort, who ran the mill in town and delivered himself when the weather allowed, mostly for the company. He climbed down stiff, blowing into his hands, and looked at the woodpile the way men look at a thing they are sizing up without meaning to. "You've got yourself a worker," he said. The rancher came out from the barn, hat low against the glare, and stood a moment with his hands in his coat pockets, watching her set the axe. "She's fair," he said. Halloran hauled a sack off the wagon bed and set it against the fence post, grunting with it. "Wish I'd known her people 15 years back," he said, not looking up. "Might have saved myself some winters splitting my own." The rancher gave a short breath that was almost a laugh, the kind that costs nothing to give a neighbor standing in the cold. "Should have had her 15 years ago myself," he said. "Would have saved me some winters too." He said it easy, the way a man says a thing to fill the space between hauling sacks, and Halloran laughed once, short, and reached for the next one. She did not look up from the stump. The axe came down, split, fell away. She reached for the next round and set it, and did not let her hands slow. But the rancher had gone quiet. It was not a large silence. Halloran did not seem to notice it, occupied with the sacks, and the frost kept ticking as it thinned in the sun. But the rancher stood there a moment longer than the joke required, his eyes gone somewhere past the fence line, past the woodpile, past the 15 years he had named without meaning to name anything at all. 15 years put her in this yard, this kitchen, before the house had gone quiet. 15 years put her at that stove before the fever came and took what it took. He had said it the way a man says a thing about weather, and it had come out sounding like a thing about a life he had not had. Halloran hefted the last sack and did not linger, glancing once at the sky and once at his team, and said something about getting back before the road turned to ice. The rancher answered him. His voice was even, but when the wagon pulled off down the lane, he stood by the fence a moment with his hand resting on the top rail, looking at nothing in particular, and did not go back to the barn right away. The frost had not fully gone by evening. It sat in the low places of the yard where the sun did not reach, and the light going down over the ridge was thin and pink and cold. He came in from the barn later than usual. The lamp was lit in the front room, and before he saw her, he saw the chair. It stood by the stove where the woodbox used to sit, crowded against the wall. The cane seat was new, tight woven, pale against the dark arms worn smooth by hands that were not his. She had pushed the woodbox to the other side to make room. He stood in the doorway. She did not look up from the kindling. She had the hatchet going in small strokes, splitting a log into thin lengths for morning, and the sound of it filled the space where a question might have gone. He crossed the room without speaking. He put his hand on the back of the chair, on the rail that had gone unused so long, the varnish had dulled to nothing. 5 years had not been graceful to the wood, but the cane held, and when he lowered himself into it, the joints took his weight without complaint. He sat there. The rockers found the boards under them, and the chair moved, once, twice, a small arc that had not been made in this house since before the fever came. He put both hands flat on the arms and did not rock it again. He only sat and let it hold him. She kept working. The lamp threw her shadow long across the floor, bent over the block, and the strokes of the hatchet were even and unhurried, the way a person works who is not watching to see what happens behind them. Neither said anything for a while. The stove ticked as it does when the wood inside settles. Outside, the last color went out of the sky, and the yard went the flat gray blue of early winter dusk. He looked at the chair arm under his hand. He looked at the mended seat, the tight rows of new cane laid in against the old frame, and did not ask when she had done it, or where she had learned the pattern, or what had made her think to try. "Chair's sound," he said finally. "It was worth the mending," she said, not looking up. He did not answer that. He sat a while longer, the rockers still, his hands loose now on the wood, and watched the small violence of the hatchet come down clean each time, watched the kindling fall away in even pieces onto the pile she was building for morning. The lamp burned low and steady. Outside, the frost came back into the low places of the yard, and neither of them moved to close the door against it. The last of the wood was split on a morning hard enough to crack the water bucket by the pump. She counted the stacks along the shed wall, walked the length of them once, and did not need to count twice. Enough for December, enough for January, if the winter held to reason. Enough, likely, past that. She set the axe against the shed door and stood looking at what she had made. He came out with the horses fed and found her there, hands still, breath showing white. "That's the last of it," she said. He looked at the stacks the way a man looks at a ledger that balances. "It is." Neither of them said anything else about it that day. The wood does not need speaking over. It sits, and it is either enough or it is not. And this was enough. 3 evenings later, the frost came in, thick enough to whiten the porch rail by supper, and he found her out there after the dishes, her shawl close, watching the last light go out of the west field. He stood beside her without asking permission for the space. "Given any thought to spring?" he said. Not a question, quite. The kind of thing said sideways, so it could be walked back if it needed to be. She did not walk it back for him. "I've been thinking about it," she said. "Right here." He did not say anything for a moment. The cold moved between the porch boards. Behind them, through the open door, the lamp burned low over the kitchen table, and beyond it, angled just so toward the stove, sat the rocking chair, the cane seat tight and new, the old wood dark with years of hands that were not hers, and one evening now that was. He set his hand on the rail. She set hers down near it, close enough that the cold coming off the wood was the only thing between them, and did not move it away. Somewhere out past the barn, a horse shifted in its stall. The frost kept coming into the low places of the yard, the way it did most nights now, settling into the ruts of the wagon road, into the hollow by the well, patient in the way that only weather is patient. Neither of them spoke of the boots in the rafters, or the 5 winters before this one, or the 15 years he'd said out loud to a neighbor without meaning to. There was no need. It was all sitting in the room behind them, plain as the chair, plain as the wood stacked against the shed wall, waiting for a use it would surely find. The dusk went on settling over the ranch 2 miles from town, the porch light thin and gold against it, and they stood there together at the rail, hands close, neither one moving first,